Most people feared Adrian Moretti the moment they heard his voice. Vanessa Reed hung up on him. The rain hammered against the diner windows hard enough to blur the neon open sign into a red smear across the wet glass while Vanessa balanced 3 coffee mugs along her arm and ignored the ache spreading through her lower back after 12 straight hours on shift. Midnight crowds in South Philly were always unpredictable. Some nights brought exhausted nurses from St. Mary's Hospital 2 blocks away. Some nights brought drunk college kids with fake IDs and loud mouths. Tonight brought silence, bad weather, and exactly $14.70 in tips sitting inside Vanessa's apron pocket. The old diner clock above the kitchen pass-through flickered 11:42 p.m. as the phone behind the counter rang again. Lou, the owner, cursed under his breath while scraping burnt hash browns off the grill. "Vanessa, get that, would you?" She grabbed the receiver between shoulder and cheek while pouring coffee for a truck driver sitting near the window. Riverside Diner. "This is Vanessa speaking." The man on the other end didn't answer immediately. She heard the faint hum of traffic first. Then a deep voice, smooth but cold enough to stop her hand mid-pour. "Finally. I've been calling for 6 minutes." Vanessa glanced at the blinking caller ID screen. Unknown number. "Sorry about the wait, sir. We're short-staffed tonight." "That sounds like your problem, not mine." Her jaw tightened slightly. She'd dealt with worse customers before. Men who snapped fingers at her. Men who called her sweetheart like it was an insult instead of a name. Men who looked at her skin first and her name tag second. Still, something about this voice felt different. Controlled. Sharp. Like the kind of man who expected the entire world to move faster for him. "What can I get started for you?" she asked. "Medium rare steak. Fries. Black coffee. And tell whoever's cooking not to ruin it." Lou rolled his eyes from the grill as if he could somehow hear the attitude through the receiver. Vanessa scribbled the order onto her pad. "Anything else?" "Yeah," the man said. "Teach your staff how to answer a damn phone before customers stop wasting their money here." Vanessa froze for half a second. Across the diner, an elderly couple quietly watched her from booth 6 while rainwater crawled down the windows behind them. Normally she would have swallowed the insult. Rent was due in 4 days. Her younger brother's community college payment still sat unpaid on her kitchen table. She needed this job too badly to argue. But exhaustion has a dangerous way of stripping fear out of people. And tonight, Vanessa Reed was exhausted. "Sir," she said slowly, "if you hate the service that much, maybe order somewhere else." Silence. Not the awkward kind. The dangerous kind. Lou looked up from the grill. Even the old coffee machine seemed quieter. Then the man spoke again, his voice lower now. "Excuse me." Vanessa stared at the rain outside the diner windows, pulse hammering in her throat. "You heard me." Another pause. Longer this time. She imagined some rich jerk sitting in a luxury condo downtown, offended that a waitress dared speak back to him. Honestly, she didn't care anymore. Not tonight. "You know what?" the man finally said. "Forget the order." Vanessa didn't hesitate. Gladly. And before her courage could disappear, she slammed the phone down onto the receiver cradle hard enough to make the silverware containers rattle beside it. The entire diner went silent. Lou stared at her from behind the grill with genuine horror. "Vanessa," he whispered, "what the hell did you just do?" Lou Martin had owned Riverside Diner for 28 years, and in all that time Vanessa had never seen the color drain from his face so fast. The spatula slipped from his hand onto the grill with a sharp metallic clang before he rushed toward the counter, wiping grease from his palms onto his apron like somehow that mattered now. "Tell me you did not just hang up on that man," he whispered. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively even though her stomach had already started twisting with regret. "I hung up on a rude customer." Lou stared at her like she had just announced the building was on fire. Outside, thunder rolled across the city low and heavy, rattling the diner windows. That was not a customer, Lou said quietly. That was Adrian Moretti. The name hit the room harder than the storm outside. One of the truck drivers near the front booth slowly lowered his coffee mug. The elderly woman in booth 6 exchanged a nervous glance with her husband. Vanessa frowned. Who? Lou blinked at her in disbelief. You seriously do not know who Adrian Moretti is? Vanessa shook her head slowly. She worked doubles 6 days a week. Whatever rich people or politicians ran Philadelphia meant nothing to her as long as rent kept climbing and eggs stayed expensive. Lou leaned closer across the counter. He owns half the warehouses down by the river. Restaurants too. Nightclubs. Real estate. People around here do not slam phones down on Adrian Moretti. Vanessa tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out weak. Okay, so he is some rich businessman with anger issues. Lou did not laugh. The silence spreading across the diner suddenly felt too thick. Too aware. Vanessa noticed one of the late-night customers quietly paying his bill without finishing his pie. Another checked outside through the rain-streaked glass like he expected something to happen. Then came the headlights. Long black beams cut through the storm before a sleek sedan rolled slowly to the curb outside Riverside Diner. The engine did not shut off. Rain slid across the polished black exterior while the tinted windows reflected the neon diner sign in trembling red waves. Nobody inside moved. Vanessa felt her pulse begin to hammer again. No, Lou muttered under his breath. No, no, no. The passenger door opened first. A man stepped out holding a black umbrella despite the short distance to the diner entrance. He wore a charcoal overcoat fitted clean across broad shoulders, polished shoes untouched by puddles, and a kind of calm expression that belonged to people used to being obeyed immediately. Another man exited the driver's side. Equally quiet. Equally controlled. Vanessa suddenly became aware of her faded sneakers, the coffee stain on her sleeve, and the exhaustion sitting under her eyes after 12 hours of work. Lou, she whispered carefully, why are you acting like the president just showed up? Lou swallowed hard. Because men like that do not come to places like this over hurt feelings. The two men remained outside for several seconds as rain hammered against the sidewalk around them. Then the back passenger door opened slowly. A tall figure stepped out from the sedan wearing a dark wool coat over an expensive black suit. One hand adjusted the cuff of his sleeve before he looked toward the diner windows. Even through the rain and neon reflections, Vanessa felt it immediately. Presence. The kind that changed the air in a room before someone even entered it. Adrian Moretti stood perfectly still beneath the storm while water rolled off the umbrella held over him. Then his eyes lifted toward the diner window directly toward her. Vanessa stopped breathing for half a second. Because somehow, impossibly, she knew he had recognized her before he even walked inside. The bell above the diner door rang softly, but somehow the sound cut through the room sharper than thunder. Adrian Moretti stepped inside Riverside Diner with rain still clinging to the shoulders of his dark wool coat while the two men behind him remained near the entrance, silent and watchful. The warmth of the diner wrapped briefly around the cold air that followed him in, carrying the scent of coffee, fried onions, and old vinyl booths polished by decades of exhausted customers. Vanessa had expected arrogance. Maybe anger. What unsettled her instead was how calm he looked. Adrian scanned the diner once with the kind of measured stillness that made everyone instinctively lower their voices. He appeared younger than she expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair brushed neatly back and sharp features that belonged on magazine covers instead of whispered conversations. His charcoal suit fit perfectly beneath the coat, every detail expensive without trying too hard to announce it. But it was his eyes that stopped Vanessa cold. Dark. Focused. Controlled in a way that made shouting unnecessary. Lou nearly stumbled over himself rushing forward. Mr. Moretti, he said nervously. I am so sorry about earlier. Vanessa did not realize who she was speaking to. She is tired and she did not mean any disrespect. Adrian removed one black leather glove finger by finger without looking at Lou, did she not? His voice sounded exactly the same as it had over the phone. Smooth. Deep. Calm enough to make Vanessa more nervous than yelling would have. Lou forced out an awkward laugh. I promise it will not happen again. Adrian finally glanced toward Vanessa. Not rushed. Not angry. Just direct. The diner suddenly felt too small under that stare. Vanessa straightened instinctively beside the counter, refusing to look away even though every survival instinct told her she probably should. Adrian studied her for one long moment before speaking again. Which one is Vanessa? Lou blinked rapidly. Sir. I asked a simple question. Silence swallowed the room. Vanessa could hear rain hitting the windows and the faint hiss of the grill behind the counter. Slowly, she stepped forward. I am Vanessa. Adrian looked at her properly now. Her natural curls tied back loosely after a long shift. Brown eyes sharp despite exhaustion. The faded blue waitress uniform she had washed so many times the fabric had gone soft at the seams. He noticed all of it. Vanessa hated that she noticed him noticing. You hang up on all your customers? He asked quietly. One of the truck drivers pretended to stare at his pie while listening carefully. Vanessa folded her arms tighter across herself. Only the rude ones. Lou shut his eyes like he physically felt the pain of her answer. But Adrian did something nobody expected. The corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. More like surprise fighting its way through irritation. Interesting, he murmured. Then, without another word, he walked past her toward the farthest booth by the rain-streaked windows. The same booth Vanessa had cleaned 20 minutes earlier. He removed his coat slowly and draped it across the seat beside him before loosening the cuff of his white dress shirt just enough to reveal the edge of an expensive silver watch beneath it. One of the men near the entrance stepped forward immediately. Boss, we can go somewhere else. Adrian shook his head once. No, he sat down calmly and picked up the laminated menu even. Though everyone in the diner knew men like him probably never looked at prices. Then he lifted his eyes back toward the counter. Toward Vanessa. Coffee, he said. From the waitress who hung up on me. Vanessa stared at the coffee pot for 2 full seconds before realizing Lou was silently motioning for her to move. The entire diner felt suspended in some strange frozen moment where nobody wanted to breathe too loudly. Rain continued sliding down the windows in silver streams while Adrian Moretti sat alone in the back booth like he belonged there more than anyone else in the room. One of the bodyguards remained near the entrance with his hands folded calmly in front of him while the other stood beside the jukebox watching the street outside. Neither man spoke. Neither man needed to. Vanessa grabbed a clean mug from beneath the counter and filled it carefully, forcing her hands not to shake. Lou leaned close enough for only her to hear. Just bring the coffee. Smile. Apologize. Then walk away. Vanessa did not answer. Because something stubborn inside her still refused to believe she had done anything wrong. Customers could not treat people however they wanted simply because they had money. At least that was what she kept telling herself while carrying the mug across the diner floor toward the booth near the windows. Adrian looked up the moment she approached. Not dramatically. Just immediately. Like he had been tracking every movement she made since sitting down. Up close, Vanessa noticed details she had missed before. Faint shadows beneath his eyes. A loosened tie. The slight tension in his jaw that suggested exhaustion instead of anger. He did not look like a man arriving from a nightclub or some luxury dinner downtown. He looked like someone who had been carrying a very long day on his shoulders. Vanessa placed the coffee carefully in front of him. Black. No sugar. Adrian glanced at the mug. You remembered. You were not exactly subtle about it. For the briefest second, she thought she saw amusement flicker in his eyes again. He wrapped one hand around the warm ceramic mug but did not drink immediately. Most people apologize after hanging up on me, he said calmly. Vanessa folded her arms lightly. Most people probably do not get spoken to like that all day. Adrian leaned back slightly against the booth. Outside, lightning flashed across the rain-soaked street for half a second before fading again. And how exactly was I spoken to? Vanessa looked at him directly now. Like I was stupid. The answer landed between them with enough honesty to make even Vanessa surprised. She said it aloud. Adrian remained quiet. Not offended. Not defensive. Just listening. She continued before she could stop herself. You called 10 minutes before closing during a storm. Half the city is flooded. We are short-staffed. I have been here since 10 this morning. And you acted like none of that mattered because your dinner was delayed. Somewhere near the counter, Lou nearly dropped a stack of plates. But Adrian did not interrupt her. He simply watched her with that same unnerving focus. Finally, he took a slow sip of the coffee. It is good, he said. Vanessa blinked once, thrown off balance by the response. Thank you. You still should not hang up on customers. You still should not talk down to waitresses. Silence again. But different this time. Less sharp. The old couple in booth 6 openly pretended not to stare while listening to every word. Rain hammered against the windows harder now, turning the street outside into blurred reflections of headlights and water. Adrian lowered the mug slowly onto the table. Do you always talk to people this honestly? Vanessa shrugged tiredly. Usually only after hour 12. Something in Adrian's expression shifted then. Subtle. Human. He glanced briefly toward her worn sneakers before his eyes returned to her face. 12-hour shift. Double shift. And you are still here smiling at customers. Vanessa gave a quiet laugh without humor. Rent does not pay itself. Adrian looked down at the coffee for a moment like he was thinking about something much further away than the diner. When he finally spoke again, his voice had lost some of its earlier coldness. You know, he said quietly, most people become very polite the second they recognize me. Vanessa met his eyes steadily. Maybe. That is the problem. For the first time since entering Riverside Diner, Adrian Moretti looked genuinely caught off guard. Not angry. Not insulted. Just still in a way that suggested Vanessa's words had landed somewhere deeper than she intended. Outside, rainwater rushed along the curb beneath the diner windows while distant sirens echoed somewhere downtown. The old jukebox near the bathrooms hummed softly between songs, filling the silence neither of them seemed eager to break. Adrian studied Vanessa for another long moment before glancing down at the coffee in his hands. Maybe it is, he admitted quietly. Lou nearly walked into a chair hearing those words leave the man's mouth. Vanessa blinked once, surprised herself. She had expected retaliation. Maybe sarcasm. Men with power rarely admitted fault, especially not to women serving coffee at midnight. But Adrian only leaned back against the booth and loosened his tie slightly more, like the weight of the evening had finally become noticeable. Vanessa noticed the movement immediately. The expensive suit. The calm posture. The bodyguards outside. None of it matched the exhaustion in his face now. Long night, she asked before thinking better of it. Adrian let out the faintest breath that almost resembled a laugh. That obvious? You look like somebody who forgot what sleep feels like. One of the bodyguards glanced over briefly, clearly surprised anyone would speak to Adrian that casually. But Adrian did not seem offended. If anything, he seemed relieved by it. He stared out the rain-streaked window for a few seconds before answering. I spent 6 hours at Jefferson Memorial Hospital today. Vanessa's expression softened slightly despite herself. Someone sick? Adrian nodded once. My mother. The answer changed something immediately. The room still looked the same. Same rain. Same flickering neon sign. Same smell of coffee and grilled onions lingering in the air. But suddenly Adrian Moretti felt less like a dangerous rumor and more like a tired son sitting alone in a diner after midnight. Vanessa rested one hand lightly against the booth divider. Is she okay? Adrian rolled the warm coffee mug slowly between his palms. Some days are better than others. His voice remained controlled, but she noticed the slight pause before the answer. The careful choice of words people used when the truth hurt too much to say directly. Vanessa understood that tone better than most. 3 years earlier she had heard doctors speak the same way about her father before cancer took him in less than 5 months. Adrian continued quietly. The hospital food is terrible. She wanted pie from this diner instead. Vanessa frowned slightly. Wait. Your order earlier, Adrian nodded toward the kitchen. Blueberry pie. Extra whipped cream. Vanessa felt heat creep into her cheeks almost instantly. She had been so exhausted and irritated she barely remembered the full order after he insulted her. Oh. Adrian looked up at her then, something unreadable moving behind his dark eyes. You thought I was just another rich guy screaming about dinner. Vanessa folded her arms awkwardly. To be fair, you kind of sounded like one. That earned a real reaction this time. Small. Brief. But unmistakably human. Adrian shook his head once while looking down at the coffee. You were not entirely wrong. The tension around the booth eased just enough for Vanessa to finally breathe normally again. Near the counter, Lou stared openly in disbelief at the fact nobody had been fired, threatened, or dragged into catastrophe. Instead, Adrian Moretti sat quietly drinking diner coffee while talking about hospital pie orders like an ordinary man. Vanessa glanced toward the rain outside. My dad used to come here after chemo appointments, she said softly before she could stop herself. Adrian lifted his eyes immediately. Used to? She nodded once. Yeah. Silence settled again, but this time it felt different. Softer. Shared. The kind of silence built from exhaustion instead of fear. Adrian looked at her carefully then. Really carefully. As though for the first time all night, he was seeing more than a waitress in a faded uniform. And Vanessa suddenly realized something deeply unsettling. The most dangerous man she had ever met looked lonely. The clock above the counter crept past midnight while rain continued drumming against Riverside Diner hard enough to make the neon lights outside flicker across the wet pavement in restless red and blue reflections. Most of the customers had quietly finished eating by now, but nobody seemed eager to leave while Adrian Moretti sat in the back booth. Curiosity had glued people to their seats almost as much as fear. Vanessa carried a fresh pot of coffee toward booth 6 where the elderly couple sat sharing a slice of lemon pie. Mrs. Green smiled warmly as Vanessa refilled her cup. Honey, you should sit down for 5 minutes before you fall over. Vanessa laughed softly. I wish. You have not stopped moving since we got here, Mr. Green added gently. That boy in the back better leave you a good tip after all this excitement. Vanessa glanced briefly toward Adrian's booth. He was still sitting quietly by the window, one hand resting near the untouched menu while his attention drifted somewhere far beyond the rain outside. I think he has bigger things on his mind than tipping waitresses, she murmured. Mrs. Green lowered her voice. Maybe. But he has not looked away from you all night. Vanessa rolled her eyes lightly, pretending not to hear the comment even though warmth crept briefly into her face. Before she could answer, the diner door swung open again with a gust of cold air and loud laughter spilled inside. 4 sharply dressed men in their 20s entered carrying the sharp scent of expensive cologne and whiskey. One wore a designer varsity jacket despite the storm while another talked loudly into his phone without acknowledging anyone around him. Lou's shoulders visibly tightened behind the counter. "Great," he muttered. "Midtown Finance Boys." The group slid into a booth near the center of the diner, loud enough to immediately change the atmosphere. One snapped his fingers toward Vanessa before she had even reached the counter again. "Yo, waitress," he called. "Can we get menus sometime this century?" Vanessa forced professionalism across her tired expression and walked over calmly. "Menus are right here, sir." She placed them neatly on the table. Another man leaned back against the booth with a smirk. "Well damn," he said. Loudly enough for half the diner to hear. "This place got prettier after midnight." The others laughed. Vanessa ignored it. She had spent years mastering the art of selective hearing. "What can I start you with?" "Depends," the first man said while glancing her up and down in a way that instantly made her skin tighten with discomfort. "Do smiles cost extra tonight?" More laughter. Vanessa kept her expression neutral. "Coffee? You got anything stronger?" "This is a diner, sir." One of them shook his head dramatically. "See, that attitude right there. That is why customer service is dying." Another added under his breath but loud enough to hear, "Probably thinks she is too good for this job." Vanessa wrote nothing on her pad. Her exhaustion pressed heavily behind her eyes now. 12 hours of carrying plates. 12 hours of fake smiles. 12 hours of pretending disrespect rolled off her skin easier than it actually did. "If you are ready to order," she said calmly, "I can take it. Otherwise I have other tables." The man in the varsity jacket smirked. "Relax. We are joking." "Funny," Vanessa replied quietly. Must have missed the punchline. The table went still for half a second. Then came another laugh, sharper this time. "Damn," one muttered. "She got attitude." Near the windows, Adrian Moretti slowly lifted his eyes from his coffee. He had not said a single word during the exchange. Had not moved. But something subtle changed in the air the moment his attention settled on the table. Vanessa felt it immediately. So did everyone else in the diner. The finance boys noticed him too a second later. One frowned slightly while trying to place the face. Then the color drained from his expression almost instantly. Because suddenly they realized exactly who had been listening the entire time. The laughter at the finance table disappeared so fast it almost sounded painful. One of the men immediately sat straighter in the booth while another lowered his eyes toward the untouched menu in front of him as if suddenly fascinated by sandwich prices. The man in the varsity jacket swallowed hard before forcing out a nervous smile toward Adrian Moretti. "Mr. Moretti," he said. "Carefully. Did not realize you were here." Adrian remained seated near the rain-covered windows, one arm resting casually along the booth while the diner lights reflected softly against the dark glass behind him. He did not answer immediately. That silence alone was enough to drain every trace of arrogance from the table. Vanessa stood beside the booth holding her order pad against her apron, caught awkwardly between wanting to leave and not wanting to appear intimidated. Adrian finally lifted his coffee mug for another slow sip before speaking. Clearly. His voice remained calm. Smooth. But somehow even quieter than before. The finance boys exchanged uneasy glances. "We were only joking around with the waitress," one said quickly. Adrian's eyes shifted toward Vanessa then. She noticed immediately that he was not looking at her uniform anymore or the tired circles beneath her eyes. He was watching the way she held herself. Straight shoulders despite exhaustion. Calm expression despite humiliation. The way she refused to shrink just because people with money decided to turn her into entertainment. Adrian had spent years surrounded by people who folded under pressure. Men who lied to impress him. Men who agreed with everything he said before he finished speaking. Yet this exhausted waitress in worn sneakers had challenged him twice in one night without even knowing whether it was safe. Something about that unsettled him in a way he could not explain. Interesting sense of humor, Adrian said quietly while looking back at the table. Nobody laughed. Rain continued beating against the diner windows while the old clock above the register ticked loudly through the silence. Vanessa shifted slightly, preparing to step away before the situation grew worse. Then one of the men muttered under his breath, trying and failing to recover his pride. She has been rude all night anyway. Adrian's gaze sharpened instantly. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just enough to make the entire diner go still again. Rude, he repeated softly. The man cleared his throat. I mean, she has attitude. Adrian leaned back slightly in the booth, considering the words with unsettling calm. Then he glanced toward Vanessa once more. Did she insult you? The man blinked. What? Did she mock you? Embarrass you? Speak to you with disrespect? No, but, Adrian interrupted gently. Then perhaps the problem is that she did not let you speak to her however you wanted. Nobody at the table answered. Because there was no safe response left. Vanessa stared at Adrian openly now, surprised by the direction this conversation had taken. He could have ignored everything. Men with power usually did. Especially when women like her were the target. Instead, he sat there defending her dignity with the same calm voice he had used ordering coffee. Adrian lowered the mug slowly onto the table. You know what I noticed tonight? He asked. The finance boys remained silent. She worked 12 hours straight. His eyes moved briefly toward Vanessa again. She smiled at customers who barely looked at her. She carried plates through a storm while half this city stayed warm inside luxury apartments. His voice never rose, but every word landed heavily inside the quiet diner. And somehow she still treated people with more dignity than most men wearing $1,000 watches. The room went completely silent. Even Lou stopped pretending to wipe down the counter. One of the finance boys looked down at the table in embarrassment while another stared toward the rain outside, unable to meet Adrian's eyes. Vanessa felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest. Because nobody had ever spoken about her like that before. Not customers. Not managers. Not even herself. Adrian finally looked directly at the table again. Apologize to her. Simple words. Calm words. But nobody questioned them. One by one, awkward apologies stumbled across the booth toward Vanessa while she stood frozen beside her order pad, unsure what shocked her more. The apologies themselves or the fact that Adrian Moretti seemed genuinely angry on her behalf. The apologies came awkwardly across the diner booth as the finance boys admitted they had crossed a line with Vanessa. Rain battered the Riverside diner windows while Adrian Moretti sat quietly beside untouched coffee and pie, refusing to let the insult pass. Unnoticed. Vanessa tried to dismiss the moment, but Adrian calmly answered, no, it was not fine, silencing the room again. One of the men offered her money out of embarrassment, yet she pushed it back immediately. I do not need pity tips. Adrian watched carefully, genuine respect settling into his expression for the first time. Unlike everyone else who bent beneath power or money, Vanessa kept choosing dignity even when life exhausted her. She joked sharply enough to break the tension, taking the group's burger order while Lou stared at her like he had witnessed a miracle. Before leaving, Adrian quietly placed several $100 bills beneath the menu. Vanessa protested, insisting she had only done her job. Adrian looked directly at her and replied, exactly. Then he handed her a simple black business card containing only his personal number. If this city ever makes you feel invisible again, call me. After he disappeared into the storm, the diner remained stunned. Even the finance boys admitted their bosses could not get meetings with Adrian Moretti, yet he had given Vanessa direct access to him. Lou discovered nearly $2,000 left on the table while Vanessa answered a late-night call from her younger brother Marcus, who apologized for struggling with college expenses. Looking at the money beside her coffee cup, Vanessa realized for the first time in months that survival might finally become easier. And somewhere beyond the rain-covered Philadelphia streets, Adrian Moretti carried the memory of a woman who valued dignity more than fear.